There we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session of DEMOFEST, Insights from the 2021 SE Compensation and Workload Report with John Cook, Senior Marketing Manager at Consensus. My name is Derek Zierenberg. I'm with Consensus, and I'll be facilitating this session. DEMOFEST is hosted by Consensus. We are an intelligent demo automation software company that helps you scale pre-sales. Using Consensus, your sales engineering team builds a library of reusable interactive video demos that sales sends out on demand. Consensus automatically personalizes the experience and tracks engagement, bringing prospects to live demos better educated and ready to talk specifics. This reduces unqualified demos to near zero and can double your SE team's productivity. If you'd like to see an automated demo in action, click the link in the resources section in Whova. All right, and we want to remind everybody that the 2021 Sales Engineering Compensation and Workload Report will be released on May 26th. You can register to get that report via the link on the left. And now we are recording this session, and we'll be posting the links to the recordings in about 2 weeks in the Scaling Pre-Sales and Sales Engineering LinkedIn group. So we encourage you to join the group, and I'll paste a link in the group in the chat window in just a moment. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so be sure to drop your questions in the Q&A section as opposed to in the chat. But let me introduce you to our speaker, John Cook. He is, again, the Senior Marketing Manager at Consensus. For the past 3 years, he's been searching out the brightest thought leaders in the pre-sales space, conducting original research, and generally making a nuisance of himself. He's the author of the Sales Engineering Compensation and Workload Study. John, thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass it over to you.
Fantastic. Let me see if I can get a hold of the screen, and we'll get this thing rolling. When I say, you know, I have been making a nuisance of myself, that's it's not false modesty. I really appreciate the fantastic response that we've gotten as far as everybody who has participated in the study, people who have been so receptive as who've reached out about DEMOFEST and all of that to organize the event and everything. It's been a fantastic ride, and really the pre-sales crowd, as vibes go, pre-sales practitioners and leadership. I don't know of another conference or another crowd of people that has such a fantastic vibe at a professional conference like this. So thanks everybody for coming. My name is John Cook. As Derek said, I'm the author of the study. A quick note on the Q&A. With a session like this, I can kind of minimize some pop here. With a session like this, it's questions can get pretty sharp as far as channeling down to, can you tell me what this metric is by these 3-4 different cross sections, to narrow it down, which I totally get. That's how we get our lookalike cohorts and everything. But for the purposes of this session, if I'm going to try and answer some of those, if we can keep it to 1 or 2 levels deep, I'll have a better chance of giving you data in a timely fashion. So go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A, and Derek, if you could help me kind of monitor those, I'd appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about the survey that we did. So I reached out to pre-sales practitioners and leaders all throughout LinkedIn, people who were customers, people who weren't customers of Consensus, people who I encouraged everybody to share it out. And then within the report, my only requirement was that you are either in pre-sales or a leader of a pre-sales practitioner, like an individual contributor, or a leader where pre-sales kind of rolls up to you. And this is what we came up with. So this year we hit 1,079 participants versus 464 in our 2020 study. We added 13 countries for a total of 53 countries that participated in this study. As you're going to see that while we have some aggregate data overall, there are certain countries that we're picking kind of the top 5 to surface the data on specifically, and then much of it will boil down to 3 specific regions, which are the US, the UK, and Europe, which is where we have the most statistically significant data overall. But I'll give you some outside of that as well. Here's a quick look at some of the countries that participated. As far as demographics, 82 just about 83% of the participants were software vendors. And what's interesting is that the numbers don't vary all that much, at least on a cursory view, they don't vary all that much from software's numbers don't vary all that much from the hardware vendors and the hardware software combination vendors, professional services, et cetera. There's some, but it's not enough to worry too much about in this context. As far as roles, we had 60.7% and 39.3% split between leaders and practitioners. And it is interesting to note that discrepancies still persist in how leaders and practitioners report on workload and staffing levels. They tend to, when asked, okay, how do you staff, what numbers do you staff sales to pre-sales, and we're looking at those ratios. Practitioners report supporting more people for a single pre-sales practitioner than staffing levels would seem to indicate they should be supporting. Organization size, you can see a little bit of what our split is here. This is just the portion of respondents who belong to different organization sizes, quite a sizable chunk in large enterprise, over 10,000 employees, another sizable chunk about the same size in kind of mid-market, small to mid-market, that 151 to 500 employees in the organization. And then a fairly even distribution, going throughout there with that. So let's dive straight into what we all want to know, which is, what does compensation look like across the board? And I've got some data here that I'll be interested to get everybody's thoughts on. So if you have strong opinions about this and reasons why we're seeing some of these things that we are seeing, then please do feel free to drop them into the chat there. All right. What's everybody making? So a quick note about how we are segmenting this. This shows the green is total OTE. OTE stands for on target earnings. The orange is base salary, and we're splitting it up by region. A quick word about how we're doing that. It's a slightly different way to the way we did it last year, and the last time I presented on this, it was a little bit confusing for some people. Um, you can essentially think of it as just region down there along the bottom axis. I know it says USD. All of these measures are in USD, and none of these numbers is actually measured in pound sterling or euros or Canadian dollars, or Australian dollars, Indian rupees. They're all measured in USD. What I am doing is I'm grouping them by region, right? So if you are in a country that uses US dollars, then the median OTE for a practitioner is 170,000. If you're in the UK and you get paid in British pounds, then the median OTE is $131,000, right? Obviously, they don't get paid in dollars, but I asked everybody in the survey to convert to dollars so that we can do a side-by-side comparison, and it's still a meaningful comparison. So that's how that's happening. And part of the reason for that is because it made more sense to, rather than having individual countries, um, to group it together by currency, because that seems to be the unifying factor for lookalike cohorts, if you will. So rather than having France and Germany split out and so on, because they're all paid in euros, we group them all together into Europe. And similarly, the 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 region, I'm not grouping everybody in Europe into the same bucket, because there are still many countries in Europe that are not using euros and so on, and they tend to have vastly disparate numbers as far as what pay looks like. So we've kind of grouped everybody together by the home currency and how they get paid on their actual paycheck, but then we're actually measuring the numbers in dollars. If that's confusing, let me know, and I'm happy to clarify a little bit more. So here's what we're looking at as far as our distributions. Now, here's another view of the same data where you can see a little bit of the median and the mean. They're not a whole ton of difference there, except for when we get into some of our smaller data sets a little bit, like down into Canada, Australia, and but even there, the numbers don't fluctuate too terribly widely between the median and the mean. For those of you who are statistical junkies out there, then you know why we're using median and mean. For anybody who's not, doesn't nerd out on this stuff like I do, the median is just a little bit more resistant to outliers. So where we have, like, for instance, in the U.S. we had some people reporting as high as 770,000 as their OTE, which seems like a big outlier. That might skew the mean a little bit, the mean average, but the median is much less resistant to getting skewed by those outliers. So that's why we use the median in most places throughout this report. Over on the right, you can see who received, where it says whether they receive stock options. That's the percentage of respondents who said, yes, I do receive stock options as part of my compensation. So you can kind of peruse that a little bit and find, lookalike to where you are specifically. So now let's look at compensation for leaders. Leaders report the following median and median total OTE is the darker kind of I don't know, raspberry color, and the pink is the median base salary. So now this isn't a multivariate analysis that's kind of beyond the scope of this report. We're just looking at them. We just took a median average of the base salary, and I'm just stacking that up against the median average of what the total OTE was reported to be. This isn't like a paired analysis report. So, looking at if your salary is this, then your OTE is typically going to be this. It's not a paired analysis report. So just a little disclaimer there. And once again, look for your region down along the bottom. Essentially, it's the US on the left, and then the UK, and then Europe, that is those who get paid in euros, and then Canada, India, and Australia, going through there. And here's the corresponding chart to this one, just another way to look at it. Where there's a lot for us to kind of wander through today, so I apologize if I go quickly through these. But we've got quite a bit to cover, and I would like to be able to take a couple of questions at the end. So once again, stock options on the right, what percentage of respondents from these different areas reported, and this is leaders, remember, reported receiving stock options as part of their compensation. We had 100% of Australian respondents say that they received stock options, but we only had 6 leaders from Australia, so, so that may be why. All right, quota. Here's one of the first insights that I thought was kind of interesting to surface regarding quota. In the US, I hope everybody can see that. My numbers are a little bit small there, but what that says is that 27.6%, roughly 28%, 28% of respondents in the US said yes, they personally carry quota. Compare that to about 24% in Europe and only 15.6% in the UK. And what's interesting about this, so just over half as many people report carrying quota personally as far as practitioners go in the UK versus the US, with Europe being kind of skewed slightly more toward the US side. What's interesting about this is that in the US, people who reported personally carrying quota also reported approximately 14% higher on-target earnings than people who did not carry quota in the US. So on average, if you carry quota, it's generally worth a 15%, 14% pay bump versus not carrying quota in the US. That's assuming you hit your quota, right? On target earnings. In Europe, that was only 9%. And in the UK, it only equates to about a 4% bump. So if you carry quota in the UK, then your OTE, your on-target earnings, assuming you hit quota, are about 4% higher than people who are not carrying quota in the UK. There may be a bunch of different reasons for that. Having lived in the UK for a little bit myself, I know that there's a kind of a cultural thing there, and that may account for that. But that's how the numbers break down as far as OTE and quota carrying for practitioners. Now, here's where I'm going to jump right in here with some odd stuff. And I'm actually a little bit nervous about surfacing some of this data because some of it's pretty shocking, but it's not. There's a lot of data, and it all is agreeing, and so I'm interested to get everybody's thoughts in the chat on why we're seeing some of the things that we're seeing. And here's the first slight anomaly. Okay, survey question: how many years of experience do you have in your current role? Note, this question refers to total experience in your current role, not necessarily in your current company. So I'm looking for how long you've been in the role of sales engineer, senior sales engineer, principal sales engineer, things like that, because we're talking about practitioners here, okay? And here we are charting their on-target earnings according to years of experience, all right? Now, you would think that it would be a steady upward trend from those who have been in the role for less than a year through to those who have more than 20 years in their role, right? But it is not. As a matter of fact, the only place we see an upward trend between those who have been in their role less than a year over to 1 to 4 years in your role, the only place where we see an upward trend there is actually in the US. Everywhere else, we're seeing it either flat or even that people who have less than a year in their role are reporting higher median earnings than those who have more experience in the role. And it's just a little downtick there at the beginning. Now, what we'd also find, because we measured this, I just went and kind of looked into this briefly. The people who report being hired directly into their role generally report a higher median OTE. So maybe some of this is accounted for by just the fact that it's a new role and you're coming into it new, and that's the better time to negotiate salary, for instance, or total compensation. But I don't think so. Anecdotally, and I'll share this in a minute. Um, well, let me go through it now. I've reached out to a couple people and shared this. One pre-sales leader I reached out to, and I was nervous to surface some of this data because I was like, does it pass the gut check? Is this even right? Um, let's see. In the somebody's asking in the chat, the OTE here is what is on the contract, not based on the actual business results. Correct. It's so the way the question is phrased is what. Uh, so we ask what the salary is, and then we ask what the variable compensation would be, assuming you hit quota, or if you have multiple high, mid, low targets, if you hit the mid target. So that's how we measure OTE, if anybody's wondering. We take the salary and then we add the variable compensation element, assuming you hit quota. So so that's our on target earnings, right? So so as I'm talking to I was talking to this particular pre-sales leader, and I was a little nervous because I wasn't sure the data passed the gut check, and I was kind of like, that's a little bit of a worry. I showed it to her. She's quiet, and I'm kind of, as I'm walking through some of this data and the next chart that I'll show you as well, she's kind of quiet, and I'm starting to get nervous. Like, she's like, I think your data's all off or something like that. I'm nervous about that. Eventually, I just waited and let her speak, and she said, I got to tell you, John, that this exactly reflects what I'm seeing in the field. And proceeded to let me know that the reason that she's seeing this trend is that there are new pre-sales motions that are being mandated by the market. The pre-sales is changing. I mean, if there's one overarching theme of DEMOFEST this year, it feels like it's that pre-sales is rising, and with that, it's rising kind of like a rocket ship. And as we all know, rocket ships are not a smooth ride. And so here we're going to get into a little bit of the chop, a little bit of the turbulence that we can see in that ride, because there are new pre-sales motions, according to this particular pre-sales leader. There are new pre-sales motions that are required, that we really need pre-sales teams to follow. And there's actually an old guard in pre-sales who they just want a demo, and they never had to do this stuff before. They never had to partner up with sales and craft the strategy through the entire deal process. They never had to create digital assets. They never had to create some of these things. And she and her organization, she was meeting some resistance on this. Enough resistance that she was starting to think that it didn't make sense to invest a whole lot of time and resources into that old guard because they weren't changing. And so she found that she had to place much more emphasis and even more compensation, more resources devoted towards the new blood coming in. This is just anecdotal, but the data is not statistically insignificant. There's enough data behind this that I'm fairly confident in the trends that we're seeing here. And so that's on the practitioner side. Now, if that's a little bit puzzling there, this next one, this is gobsmacking, as we might say in in the UK. So leaders coming in with less than a year in their role are reporting significantly higher median OTE than people who report being in their role longer. And that's across the US, that's in Great Britain, that's in Europe, Canada is following more of a traditional line on this as far as we can see, but by far the most of our data comes from the US, the UK, and Europe. Now, talked to another leader who indicated that some of this data, we ask about salary, we ask about variable compensation, we ask about stock options in this survey. One leader indicated to me that we might be missing, we might not be accounting for or uncovering with those questions some of the maturing equity positions that some of these more tenured leaders have in their organizations. Sometimes those maturing equity positions actually dwarf salary as far as how much, as far as their total monetary value to the individual. So maybe there's an element there that we're missing out of this picture. But these U shapes, are kind of interesting. I mean, in the UK, it's a pretty significant, dip in the middle there, but it's really that less than a year uptick that where pre-sales leaders are commanding higher salaries than they have in the past. Now, my initial reaction to this was, wow, it looks like pre-sales is getting valued very differently now to what it was in the past. Maybe that's the case. One person indicates in the chat, and I'm reaching over here. We should probably put these in the Q&A, but somebody asked the question, and it's a valid question: is this ageism? The old guard has stayed in their role because they can and have adapted and been successful. Otherwise, they would have been let go. Maybe there's an element of that. I can't speak to that personally. I'm just kind of surfacing the data, so don't shoot the messenger. But yeah, that's certainly possible that there's an element of that. But the pre-sales leaders that I spoke to were indicating that it really is for them, as they reported to me, and this is purely anecdotal, there is a skill set and there are emotions that are new, that are being demanded of pre-sales, and they're putting their resources towards the members of their team and new members of the team that are going to be able to that are willing to take those motions. It was about being willing and not even about being able. There was no issue about capability. It was more about resistance to the new pre-sales motions. But once again, that's purely anecdotal. All right. One last question. Somebody asked, do leaders have quotas? Yes, roughly a similar ratio of leaders reported having quotas as well as practitioners. I didn't surface there specifically, but they also carry a similar bump in reported OTE if you carry a quota versus if you don't carry a quota as a leader. All right, let's talk about workload for a minute. How am I doing on time here, Derek?
Good. You got about 10 minutes, and then we'll take some questions.
All right, fantastic. All right, so we're going to have to breeze through some of this if we got about 10 minutes left before questions. But let's talk about the work week. So we asked, on average, how many hours per week do you work? And this is what we got. We're looking at the median of 45 hours. Leaders report a slightly higher median work week than practitioners report. So you can see here 50 versus 45 on the leader side. Sorry, 50 on the leader side versus 45 on the practitioner side. For crunch week, this is what we asked for crunch week. What is the maximum number of hours you've worked in a single week, 7-day period over the past 12 months? And the median is 60 hours, which seems like a fairly typical crunch week. There's over on the right-hand side of this bell curve, we've got people sleeping under their desks. At least that's what I was doing when I was working those hours, which I did. I haven't had to recently. Thankfully, I'm remote now, so I don't have to sleep under my desk. I have my cot is not too far away, so that's a help when it's on the crunch week. But those are some tough hours, and whoever's not had to work more than 35 hours over the last 12 months, let me know where you are, and I'll come join you. But our median looks to be about 60 hours. Ratio of AEs to SEs, that still sits at 3-to-1. That ratio has not changed since we asked it last year. It's so we're getting some very consistent data. This is now over 1,500 responses that have given this, this median of 3-to-1 ratio, and we still have a significant jump. And once again this year, and I'll try to remember to do it next year. But we have a significant chunk of people who are over 15-to-1. I'd love to see what that distribution looks like as we kind of stretch that out, and rather than bucketing it all in anything over 15, because I want to see how high that goes. But 73 people responded that their ratio was over 15-to-1, which is that's, we talked in the earlier session today about what constitutes a high performing pre-sales team. I'm of the opinion that the ratio that you're able to function under is actually an element of that's worth looking at. Leaders, once again, report a 3-to-1 ratio, where practitioners actually report a 4-to-1 ratio. If we were to segment them out, practitioners report and the way we asked that was, we asked practitioners, how many AEs do you personally support with product demos, et cetera, and pre-sales activities. Leaders, we asked it slightly differently. We asked how many AEs are on your sales team, and then we asked how many sales engineers are on the pre-sales team that supports that sales team. So we in our question, we kind of paired the pre-sales staff level to the account executive staff level, and then we just did the division. And so leaders report staffing to a ratio of 3-to-1. Practitioners report working to a ratio of 4-to-1. So that's how that breaks down. Stakeholders in the buying group, number of stakeholders, median sits at about 5 still, as far as the number of the people that are in your buying committee, right, that you have to sell to, which is a big deal, obviously, in our world in pre-sales, because we, as Kevin said last year, the reward of a good pre-sales demo is very often, thanks for that. That was awesome. Can you do it for these 4 other people? Congratulations, you did a great demo. So initial SE training, median sits at 3 months. That's 1 month less than last year's median, which so we're getting people on board faster. The question is the same. On average, how many months does it take to train a sales engineer on your team to the point where they can demo on their own? We're sitting at 3 months instead of 4 months. I don't doubt we're getting better at onboarding. I think we're also encountering much higher demand, and so there's a lot of market pressure to onboard faster and to scale and to grow teams faster. Time required per demo, 2 hours per demo. That's a half an hour less per demo than was reported last year in the median. The question was, on average, how many hours do you spend on a single product demonstration? Please include preparation time and standard follow-up, as well as time spent during the demonstration itself. So 2 hours is the median reported now. 2.5 hours was last year. What's interesting about this is that demo lag time, the amount of time that you have to wait, that a prospect has to wait for a demo once they've asked for one, that doesn't seem to be tied significantly to the AE-SE ratio. It does seem to have a correlation with how long your demo takes. So above 2.5 hours per demo, your lag time statistically increases, as opposed to below at 2 hours or below. Demo delays and business days. This is what I was talking about. The demo lag time on average for your product. How many business days does the prospect wait from the time they request a product demonstration to the time they get one? The median is 5. And like I said, it's higher for people who have longer demos versus people who have shorter demos. As far as not longer demos versus shorter demos, more man hours required total per demo versus at 2.5 hours and above, or below 2.5 hours. Underqualified demos, median is still 30%. So what percentage of your product demonstrations would you classify as unqualified or underqualified? 30% is the median. We still have some people hurting up here at the 70s and 80s, the 60s, the 50s. On that subject, we had this was one of the inciting factors for one of our customers to do business with us. They were struggling with a 50% unqualified rate on demos, and this was in their large enterprise. So they were selling into large enterprise. And just a quick word about this case study that you can grab. There's and you can reach out if you want to get a hold of this. And Derek, maybe you can post a link in the chat if you got that handy. But there's in the case study, they were struggling with a 50% unqualified rate. They introduced some basic demo automation with Consensus, where they were handling using Consensus demos to send out kind of an on-demand look at the software. So when a prospect is ready to see the software, they say, "Great, check your inbox." They check it out, and then what they found was that by doing that, and then looking at and then using that engagement as a qualifier for a live pre-sales interaction, they actually reduced their unqualified demos from around 50% to less than 5%. This is one of the biggest ways that Consensus adds value to an organization, as well as being able to, this is all part of scaling the team up, right? Scaling the pre-sales capacity up. So if you'd like to have another look into that, then we'll get you over that case study. But key activities. All right. So here's the question on key activities. Which key activities, max 4, would have the greatest impact on your success if you or your team, if you are a leader, could spend more time executing them? So essentially what we're asking with this question is, what are your high leverage activities? If you could spend your time anywhere to make the biggest difference to your organization, where would you spend it? Would you do more harbor tour demos? Would you do more RFPs? Would you do more technical demos? Like and you were able to multi-select, right? Select your top 4. Discovery reigns supreme, and not by a very small chunk. It's about 10%, maybe just a little bit less than 10%, but discovery reigns supreme. So what we're seeing is that in the pre-sales space, we need more. We want to do more discovery, better discovery, and that would move the needle more than anything else, according to our respondents. Technical demos is number 2. So if we could do those deep dive technical demos, spend more time doing those would move the needle more than some of these things down here at the bottom, like doing more RFPs, doing more intro demos, answering FAQ, frequently asked questions, etc. Planning, architecting solutions comes in number 3. Product knowledge and improvement at number 4. POCs at number 5, and consulting calls. And then below that, we drop off to less than, the next highest is about half. Prospect support is about half of the popularity of consulting calls as far as our respondents are concerned. Susan says, "I'd love to meet the SEs that are loving those RFPs." I love that. So pre-sales influence on a scale of 1 to 10. With 5 being equal to sales, how much influence and recognition does pre-sales have within your organization? Median was 5. Median response was about the same. The mode, or the most frequent response, was 4, which is slightly below sales. But by and large, pre-sales is feeling the love, which is good news. On subject of the rise of pre-sales. Let's see, pre-sales influence. Oh, we'll get to the rise of pre-sales in a minute. So the median is 5. As far as demos required per closed won deal, our median still sits at 3. And the question was, on average, and in your personal experience, how many pre-sales product demonstrations, either remote or in person, are required per closed won deal. Include all repeat demonstrations required due to new stakeholders engaging, etc. So your median sits at 3, your mode sits at 2. Um, there are some folks out there that are struggling along at 10 or more, and that's a hard, a tough road to hoe, as they say. But our median sits at 3 there. Pre-sales KPIs. We just had a big session on this as far as what people are using to measure the performance of their team. Number one KPI by far is closed revenue and ARR. There's that we separated out sales quota. You'll see about 5th down on the list is sales quota. You could arguably lump that in with closed revenue and ARR, so maybe it's even more of a difference at the top, but it's by far the number one KPI. And our panel was more or less agreed that it needs to be part of the pre-sales KPI equation. Feedback from sales is actually number 2. Demo POC activities, number 3. Percent of deals won versus lost. Now we talked about tying in the last session, we talked about tying this back to, unit win rates, right? Percentage of deals won versus lost. That's another critical KPI. Some people pointed to that as the one that they would choose if they had to choose one and leave behind all the others. That percent of deals won versus lost. That unit close rate would be the one that they'd go with.
Hey, John, just a heads up. We've got about 10 minutes before we'll need to end.
All right, fantastic. So we're just about done here, and we'll open up to Q&A. I'm going to jump on to the percentage that are currently automating. Only about 45% of our respondents said that they were currently automating some portion of the demo process, for instance, through videos or webinars or consensus or something like that. Pre-sales rising. So does pre-sales have more or less influence at your organization compared to 1 year ago? The vast majority, about 80, sorry for the pop there, everybody, about 87% plus said it's about the same or more. Very few pre-sales organizations are seeing their influence, are reporting rather that their influence is less than it was a year ago, and even fewer than that don't know. So rise of pre-sales, definitely a thing, either staying constant or increasing, and a large chunk is increasing. So in prominence. So with that, I'm going to shut this down, stop sharing my screen so that you guys are forced to endure my face, and then we'll get to a Q&A.
Yeah, cool. Let's start off with this first question from Brady. The salary bands for the sales engineering role are difficult to correlate between public data, as you mentioned, versus what we're seeing on the ground. This data is sometimes off by 25% or more. Even Radford data is lower than what we see in the recruiting process. How do you reconcile those differences? Geography plays a key role, but what else?
Well, I'm not sure if this was posted during the session or not, but this is the rub, right? What you're seeing in the recruiting process, and by the way, I spoke to another pre-sales leader who gave me a similar report saying the entry salaries that are being asked for brand new pre-sales people in the space, the entry salaries have just skyrocketed. And this particular leader indicated that they were going to focus more on promoting internally as a result of this, because there are big asks at the recruiting level right now. And I why is that? I like I say, I'm not the guru with 50 years experience as a pre-sales leader. I'm just the messenger in this regard, but it's a big jump. Like, practitioners and leaders who are in less than a year are reporting higher median OTEs than more experienced people. And I've addressed a couple of the potential causes of that, but that's anecdotally, so I'm giving you kind of the anecdotes that I get from talking to pre-sales leaders, and then uh, in but that's not data, right? That's just my anecdotes, my gut feeling on that.
Okay, next question. How was SE workload actually tracked? What was included and considered as an activity? I'd love to see the breakdown of actual time with prospects versus internal meetings, i.e. prep.
Okay. So when we talk about workload, if we're talking about specifically man hours, or no sexism intended there, just the term, but talking about man hours required per demo, um, the way we asked that was um, how many man hours are required per product demo specifically. So when we talk about workload, um, so it sounds like the question is referring maybe to a couple of different things. What is the work week, and also um, what is included in the metric for demos specifically? I would assume, since I can't think of another metric that we have where we were talking about tracking specific activities. But so for demos, that's how we asked it. We asked include prep time, include follow-up, standard follow-up, and as well as the time spent in the demo itself. For the work week, that was just a generic, like we let people self-report on that. What is your average work week, right? How many hours do you work in a week? And for crunch time, it was the same. What's the maximum number of hours that you've worked in a 7-day period over the last year? So for workload, and I think I actually saw this. I could be wrong, but the as far as specific activities that we're tracking, the only specific activities that we tracked with hours associated were demos specifically, and then the work week in general. So that's how we did that.
Great. All right, how do you get management to truly see the level of contribution pre-sales brings to the table and win rate in relation to compensation in comparison to the sales reps?
Uh, that's the big question, right? And to hear Peter Cohen talk, that's the same question that's been asked for about 30 years in the pre-sales space. He contends that it hasn't really changed much in that regard. So I'll give you what we're seeing, because I'm working with a lot of different pre-sales teams, and while I'm not personally converting management, I can tell you that I can tell you what I receive from the teams that we work with. Okay. One of the things that you can do, we talked about this on an earlier session of DEMOFEST, actually. Adam Freeman talked about CAC. Okay. Cost of customer acquisition. Cost to acquire the customer is what that actually stands for. Cost to acquire the customer. This is a metric that your executives are going to be talking about a lot. This is a major contributing factor to the success of a software company, anyway, of any company, but especially to a software company, and even more so if you have a SaaS model. Consider for a minute the value of when you're demoing to a customer. Consider the value of talking to them about their problems the way they think about their problems. In other words, you're using language that they use internally. Okay, and how much more effective that is than trying to fit them and educate them into a nomenclature, into a framework that you want them to be in. Come to them in their framework. The same applies to your other customer. Your other customer is, of course, your executive team. The sales team is also your customer. These are all stakeholders in what you are providing. And so speaking to your executive team in terms that they use to talk about their problems is, and we already know this from our presentation skills with customers directly. I would suggest speaking to them in terms that they are thinking about. And so when it comes to tracking, when it comes to surfacing data, get yourself some data on what it takes to acquire a customer. Make that a KPI. Get CAC as part of your, and measure it internally. But you don't have to measure it and feed it straight out. Start tracking it. Just start tracking it until you know what your numbers are. So there are many things in that discussion, but that's one that that surfaced to me that I think is really fantastic.
Okay, for time's sake, John, we're gonna just take one more question. Last one. One question that was missing from last year's survey, and I was disappointed to not see it in this year's. How many organizations compensate SEs individually on deals that they contribute to versus a team pooled model anchored to overall team targets?
Wow. That's a tough one. I will say we did ask one thing in this year's survey, which was how are you assigned to a deal? Is it a pool model versus, you know, being individually paired to an SE, et cetera? That data is a little bit tougher to correlate, so I don't have it in the slide. But we did ask it. That one, compensating SEs based on their individual contribution versus team contribution really comes down to okay, that really comes down to the model, right? So whether you are a pool assignment model, whether you're an individually assigned model, and I will tell you that from the discussion at the last in our panel just a few minutes ago that ended just well, I guess it's ended about an hour ago now. Tracking the contribution of an individual SE seems to be much more difficult than tracking the contribution of the team. But it's certainly possible, and it's my bad for not including that on the survey. If there's an appetite for that, and by the way, we're getting ready to craft next year's survey already. Like this is a rolling thing. So by all means, shoot me some feedback if there are specific questions that you'd like to see on next year's survey. We can't balloon it out to where it takes 2 hours to, you know, fill out the survey, but I want to know what the key elements are. And there are some that will probably drop off that aren't as valuable as maybe they were when we first started and so on. So happy to get the highest leverage questions in there, and feel free to reach out if you have a question, and if there's a specific metric that you think is like really high leverage for defining the industry. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John. Really great insights that you shared with us today. As a reminder, this session was recorded so that you can review it later on. Our next sessions at the top of the hour include the following: dramatically increase interaction in virtual demos with Julie Hansen, discovery and demo strategies and tactics for transactional sales cycles with Peter Cohen, and out of the blocks, getting pre-sales onboarded right with Clodagh Moriarty. I want to remind everybody really quickly to join the pre-sales or scaling pre-sales LinkedIn group with the link in the chat, and also to take a quick feedback survey about this session. We also invite you to leave us a video review of DEMOFEST. So see the link in the resources section and leave your video, and then you'll be entered into a drawing for prizes given out in the final session. But thank you everybody again for attending, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye-bye.